Hi, this is the Social Jello with Angelo show. My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, surfer, martial artist, and a whole lot of other things. Coming to you live from Kasai City, Japan, the Social Jello with Angelo show.
What's up, and welcome to another episode of the Social Jello with Angelo podcast. Here I am today with Kauilani, Morhead. He's coming out of... Can you say the name of your academy real quick and where it's located?
Origins Combatives, Gracie Sandpoint. We come out of Sandpoint, Idaho.
Okay, and you just opened a new academy too, right? Like you have two.
Yeah,
locations now.
we've got our headquarters in Sandpoint, and then we have our satellite location in Clark Fork.
Congratulations on the second location, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, this looks going good. So today's topic is, what's the difference between Rickson Gracie's Jiu-Jitsu and modern Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? So real quick, I'm not even introduced. I'm just gonna hand this right over to my guest because I'm a brown belt coach, but he's a black belt, so I'm considering him my in-house expert on this topic. And I'm just gonna grab that. What would be the difference? What would be the quick stand bullet point difference between those two, modern BJJ and Rickson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, which is already implying that Rickson Jiu-Jitsu is somehow old? What's up with this?
Yeah. In short, Vale Tudo self-defense versus competition-based sport jiu-jitsu. That would be the short, quick answer. With Rickson, he dives very, very deep into his kind of brand of jiu-jitsu. I know for Rickson, learning from him, the invisible jiu-jitsu is really what he's on. But he's essentially keeping the old school self-defense Helio Gracie jiu-jitsu alive through his interpretation, right? So all the Gracie family members kind of have their own interpretation, and it all stems from whoever their father or grandfather was. So for Rickson, it comes from his dad, and Rickson being the representative of the family for a short time, for a long time actually, in the Vale Tudo scene, now that he is retired from fighting, he now has his own brand of Rickson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu that focuses heavily on what worked for him in his time.
And what's the difference between Vale Tudo and MMA, for those who don't know?
Yeah, Vale Tudo is just the is it prerequisites? It predates MMA, right? So in Brazil, Vale Tudo just means no hold barred, right? So in Brazil, if you were going to have a Vale Tudo match, it would be anything goes. There's a few rules, like maybe no biting, no eye gouging, anything like that. But it's essentially MMA today.
And they weren't wearing gloves. If I'm not mistaken, it was bare knuckle.
No, I have seen some of the Vale Tudo fights with gloves on. I know like Master Hoyler has had a couple in Brazil with gloves on, but for majority, it was no gloves. I think one of the best representations of a Vale Tudo fight was Grandmaster Rickson versus Zulu. No gloves, major weight differences, and that would be a good representation of a Vale Tudo fight.
And then this is a great time for a shameless plug. If you look up here in the YouTube video, I actually interviewed John Hackelman on his YouTube channel, the Pit Online Dojo, where he talks about and reacts to Rickson Gracie's, that exact fight, the Zulu fight between Rickson Gracie, and he reacts to Vale Tudo as a style, if you guys want to check it out there. So, nice. Modern BJJ, Rickson Gracie, self-defense, Vale Tudo. It sounds like Rickson is focused more on MMA, is that right?
I would say self-defense. Now, we have this discussion a lot, right, Angelo? We have this discussion, self-defense versus sport. So I'll make the distinction right now that, at least for me and my belief, there's a difference between Vale Tudo fighting and self-defense, right? Self-defense is more situational awareness, trying to, verbally talk to your bad guy. What happens if the bad guy sucker punches you or grabs you from behind or hair grabs, things of that nature. And then more Vale Tudo fighting is both you and your opponent know you're going to fight. Both of you are bouncing around. It's in a sense a duel, right? Self-defense is not a duel. It's a surprise explosion. Hey, this young lady is getting ripped from the hair from behind. That's self-defense where, hey, you want to fight? I want to fight. Let's get it on. And we start fighting. That's the distinction, right? So I know Rickson focuses heavily on self-defense, but at the end of the day, he fought in MMA. He was a big time name in Japan. So he obviously it bleeds in. It's a very fine line that bleeds into each other. But I think I would kind of honor him a little bit better in stating self-defense, because if you see, I'm a part of the JJGF. So his federation, there's the IBJJF and then there's the JJGF. I represent Rickson with the JJGF. So if you look at their content online, it's heavily based for self-defense, and his wife is his uke. So it would be based more for the self-defense side.
All right. So then in that case, it goes to say, how would we define modern Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu then?
Yeah.
And so we've already defined Rickson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu as self-defense with Vale Tudo applications because of the self-defense aspect. Mm-hmm. So then what is the definition of modern Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Isn't it self-defense, or what's going on there?
No, not at all. I mean, that's the mask that it's the marketing mask, right? Like, you walk into any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school today and yes, we can teach you how to defend yourself. And at the end of the day, a choke is a choke, an arm lock is an arm lock, a heel hook is a heel hook. They all work, right? We're doing a combat sport, right? But you have to understand that the modern BJJ that we're seeing today has, in a good way, it has revolutionized so much that it has, just like every other martial art, has gotten away from its core of fighting. So I look at modern BJJ today as the not advanced, but the spin-off, the fun game that comes with jiu-jitsu as the martial art in a whole. But I look at sport jiu-jitsu as like a football team, right? It's just a combat football team. It's a group of athletes or people that aspire to be athletic, and it's a team, and you're learning how to do the sport in particular with throws and grappling that does not involve keeping it real, getting punched in the face, right? So that is what I would consider to be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And that sounds really rude of me to say it's a mask for marketing, but a rugby player is going to be able to defend themselves better than an average Joe, right? Because they're an athlete. They know how to tackle. They're aggressive. But that's because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu stems off of a martial art. They still utilize that marketing plan, if you will, of yes, we still know how to fight. We still know how to defend ourselves. And that's just simply not true for everybody. Now, obviously, you take a super, super athletic blue belt, 20-year-old guy that was an athlete in high school, he's going to choke the crap out of somebody in the street. But what happens when that opponent is bigger, stronger, faster, more athletic than you, and you get into the fight? What's going to happen? It's a very good chance that blue belt's not going to be able to do what he wants to do without taking some major, major damage. So that's the difference in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu versus what I would say self-defense, Vale Tudo Jiu-Jitsu is.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Social Jello with Angelo podcast. Quick commercial, I'll make this quick. ThePit.tv. This episode is sponsored by ThePit.tv. Train with John Hackelman at ThePit.tv, and you can train with a UFC coach for less than $20. Right now, there's a Black Friday sale for under $20. You can check out the entire program and earn a black belt with a UFC coach, Chuck Liddell's coach, for under $20. www.thepit.tv. Enjoy the show. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the athleticism, because I just got into a argument with a Filipino martial arts guy. No, not Tim. I forgot. There's a Tim guy who's like trolling the entire Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community right now. There's an FMA guy. Have you heard of that guy? The Tim guy,
Yeah,
Tim
yeah,
Tim something.
the white hair, spiky hair guy wears like the
Yeah,
red and black dude. Yeah,
yeah,
I know who
yeah,
you're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah. He's a Kempo guy, by the way. I
He's
think.
also a jujitsu guy too. He has a blue belt in jujitsu.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. So he's just so either way, it's not him. Make that real clear, real quick.
Gotcha.
But there was a FMA group I'm in, and the guy got really upset when he was talking about how empty hands, how it shouldn't be about the style you do, and he's sick of hearing about how it was on my last episode about how to go from karate to MMA, like the things you're gonna need to learn,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
he felt that people shouldn't have to do MMA and that MMA guys can't defend themselves on the street were his words. And that's actually a kind of common thread I see with a lot of quote unquote traditional martial artists that feel that that an MMA fighter that wouldn't work in the ring. That's what they always say. Like, hey, what doesn't work if it doesn't, just because it works in the ring doesn't work on the street, and what I know is somehow going to counteract whatever is done in the ring. And my immediate response to that is, I could, like you just said, you can grab probably any athlete. They can be a rugby player, and then I'll argue if you're doing a combat sport, now we've amplified that.
Yeah.
So for your blue belt,
100%.
we've amplified it. They're actually doing something that's related to fighting. You'd already have a hard time, and I would argue that I can grab a rugby player or a football player, and they would excel over anyone who does any non-contact traditional martial art. And I'm not gonna call out styles here, but you know who you are. If you're practicing a martial art and it does not have a full contact element to it, then you are practicing a non-contact martial art. Not to say you can't defend yourself against some average Joe, but you are going to have some huge complications against someone who does anything full contact. And I would consider American football, rugby, full contact. This is someone who's used to running and hitting people at 100%, and you're used to theorizing, is what I want to say. And I got a lot of trouble for saying that. But I think I see a lot of that happening in traditional martial arts. And then I'm wondering, is that happening in jiu-jitsu at all? Or is jiu-jitsu kind of, is it protected from that somehow?
Yeah, I don't. I think it's. I don't think it is in the way that we're thinking. I think jujitsu, no matter whether it's a sport jujitsu or a self-defense side jujitsu, you're still like, if one major theme is happening, you're rolling, you're sparring, whether it be with strikes or without strikes, from standing, without standing, you still have the ability to go super, super hard. In a sense, somebody trying to choke you to death, and you can't really get around that in jiu-jitsu. Now, yes, sometimes white belts don't spar till they get a certain belt, but at the end of the day, in the I'm just going to call it the umbrella, the art of jiu-jitsu, you have to spar. Like, I will say jiu-jitsu is, even the sport side, it is one of the last martial arts or sports, if you will, that still have like legit black belts. You know what I mean? It does not matter if you are a super upside downy, roly poly oly jiu-jitsu player. You still have to go really hard, full contact, in order to earn that black belt. Like, black belts, I'm not going to say every single time 100%, because there's always that issue, but in jiu-jitsu, you're earning that black belt. And like, for me, it took me 15, 16 years to get a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Like, those don't come easy. Those take a long time, and it's earned, whether it's sport or not. Now, it just comes down to, like, what are you doing jiu-jitsu for? Are you doing it to be a super high level competitor, or just somebody that is interested in the competition style jiu-jitsu without competing? Or are you doing it for self-defense, recreation, MMA? It doesn't matter. But no, I don't think that jiu-jitsu is going that route. I do think it's watered down, but that's solely to fit the bill of what they're trying to do as far as the competition scene.
And then I did a whole podcast about this, about the watered down Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is why I'm avoiding certain questions that came up there for anybody who follows my show. And then for anybody who does, check out, I'll put a link to that too. is BJJ been watered down? I had a whole conversation about that. But one of the things that comes up a lot when you start talking about Rickson Gracie are his criticisms of modern BJJ not being self-defense oriented. And where do you think this is coming from for him?
Well, you have to remember the era of where he comes from, the place in which he comes from, and the family which he comes from, right? Like, whatever you think about the Gracies in general, if it wasn't for the Gracies challenging other martial artists and fighting people and causing a scene, we would not have the UFC. MMA would not be where it's at today without the Gracies. Whether you like them or not, we owe them that for sure, right? I personally owe the Gracies a lot more. Rickson is a fighter. He was a representative of his family. When Halish died, he took over as a representative. And he had to be prepared for anybody or anything to challenge the family. And he had to fight them and win, right? So Rickson's coming at it from he watched jiu-jitsu from the beginnings and what it is today of there's guys out there that'll pass the guard, go knee on belly, then mount, and then go back to knee on belly, back to mount, just to earn some points without any consideration for winning that match by submission. They're doing it just to earn the points to get an easy win so they can go on to the next thing. And I agree with Rickson on those comments. Rickson's a Brazilian, so he's a little bit more gruff about it, but he's right. Jiu-jitsu is watered down in that sense if we're talking about it as a martial art. I've had to try to calm myself down quite a bit lately on that debate of I'm having to personally separate myself where I'm not a part of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu crowd anymore, if you will. Like, they're doing something completely different, and that's beautiful and awesome, and we're doing something a little bit different over here. So it's almost like, how close is karate to taekwondo? It's pretty dang close at the end of the day. They're just doing something a little different, right? So that's the way I look at it today. But if we're trying to put it all under the umbrella of a martial art, I think Rickson's right. It's watered down. There's zero consideration for strikes. There's zero consideration for weapons. There's zero consideration for verbal communication. There's zero consideration for conservancy of energy and natural body movements in that type of situation, right? It's more be a better athlete, be a better competitor, learn a bunch of moves that will get you the win.
And then this could just be like you said. I mean, as a coach, that strategy you just mentioned, from going to mount to knee on belly. If I have a player, and as I said, player, not fighter. If I have a jiu-jitsu player who does not have a good mount game, cannot finish submissions from mount, is having a tough time doing it in his weight category. Like, I'm noticing the guy can easily get swept, bridge escaped, whatever. Especially because, again, BJJ is a sport. And I always tell my guys, especially my MMA guys that also are Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu players, I tell them, hey, BJJ is a sport. You're going to find that holding mount on someone in MMA is way easier than it is in BJJ because you can punch them. Yeah. So that the constant threat of you being able to knock them out, even if we're going light contact, just the constant threat of getting punched in the face annoyingly, because you're not going to get knocked out, but it's still annoying to get tapped in the face, will make the person be on the retreat. While in BJJ, when you take out the strikes, they can relax. I mean, you can put pressure on them, but if they're good at like what Rickson always talked about, creating a small space and being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and find that space to breathe, they'll let you be in mount and they'll find their opportunity to bridge. So if I do have a player who's having a hard time putting the right amount of pressure to finish, that's a valid strategy. You rack up points so that if they do bridge escape out of it, if you did this right in a 5-minute match, you'll have way more points by the time they bridge escape out you're in closed guard. I know I'm talking.
Sure.
I'm practically speaking Chinese to anyone who's not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy right now. But you know what I mean. So any BJJ guy knows exactly what I'm talking about. Then you can just, you're in closed guard and you can kind of stall. Which again, all tactics that you should never do in MMA. And I'm always telling this to the guys. You should never, ever. And then I'll have guys that other way around, vice versa. I'll have guys that are really great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu players from other academies come over here to my place and want to do MMA and Nogi, and I'll immediately warn them, hey, there are certain strategies that you have that work great for you in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that are going to just totally work against you in MMA.
Sure.
And especially when we bring in the strikes. And that's one of the first things they have to mentally get over. Well, first they have to mentally get over getting hit in the face. Almost...
Right.
For me, I'm going to speak personally, because I know people on the internet. For me in my school in Japan, I've found that about 90% of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu players that come to my gym to do MMA, even if they had an MMA program, have never sparred with MMA rules.
Yeah.
They've either their programs were doing kickboxing and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and especially if they never fought. Like, they were thinking of it, they were dabbling in it, they never actually took a fight. They were just training at their academy in Japan. The academy will usually split the kickboxers, strikers, from the BJJ guys. And when they don't really cross the two until the person's ready to fight. So when they come into me, the first shocker for them is the idea of being hit when they are grappling.
Yeah.
So this leads into the question of, back to what you said earlier, about how it's not that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has been watered down. They're just kind of going in a different direction.
Yeah.
So how would a Brazilian, let's say, and this is going to be like one of our final questions because we're going to wrap up. Let's say you are a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu player who is interested in getting into MMA, and you are in that percentage. Maybe you're not, but maybe you are, and you're listening to this and be like, yeah, I am. I'm at one of those schools that doesn't do any MMA. They only do sport Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. How should that person get ready if they want to go into the cage?
It's so funny is I literally just had this conversation with a new student of mine, came in as a blue belt. And he came with our school and wanted to get into self-defense, Vale Tudo style of jiu-jitsu. Quite a few of our fighters, they showcase Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in the cage very, very well. And they wanted to come in and do that. They wanted that style of jiu-jitsu. So we just had this conversation, which is beautiful. And it's going to sound weird. You got to drink the Kool-Aid. Okay, you've got to drink the Kool-Aid. So it's just like a striker, right? When you bring a karate guy into a boxing gym, you have to break habits in order for them to be able to bridge that gap, right? So it's the exact same thing because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is so far removed from fighting and self-defense that there's habits that you have to break with that BJJ player. And I'm doing it right now with one of my students, and he's doing amazing doing it, but he's drinking the Kool-Aid. So what I mean by this, so in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, what are the kind of the foundational principles that engulfs all of this? It's utilize your athleticism. You have a certain amount of time to escape or get your point submissions, whatever. You are encouraged to go, and get what you're trying to get no matter what, right? The distance at which the match or the fight is fought is very different. Where with Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, you mentioned stalling earlier, right? Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is all about stalling. And I know that sounds weird because Rickson talks about stalling, but I'm a believer in stalling. Why? Because the core foundational principle that Grandmaster Helio wanted for his Jiu-Jitsu was conservancy of energy, right? So if I'm a smaller person, I can't burn my energy at the same rate as this bigger guy because he's going to beat me. So we have to stall and conserve our energy. But that doesn't work for the cage. I understand that, because the cage is still a sport. It is still a combat sport. So what I'm doing with my student in particular is he's very fast and aggressive, because that's how jiu-jitsu is. He likes to grab. We wear the gi quite a bit, even when we put gloves on and strike, because there's more friction. It's more cleanliness. But he wants to grab lapels and keep at a punching distance away, because that's what his body is used to doing. It's body memorization, right? So we're now having to really slow him down, teach him tight thoughts. I say that all the time. Tight thoughts, protect your castle. So we're teaching him punch block stages. So how do you grapple? That means standing and on the ground with strikes involved. How to slow the fight down, because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it looks like two wild banshees going at it a lot of times. How do we slow the fight down? How can we strike the person while maintaining a dominant position? And then how do we look for the submissions within that grapple match, that fight, all while protecting ourselves from getting hit or gassed out? So those are some of the things that I'm having to work on with students now, because it's so far removed from fighting. And Rickson obviously is very, very big on his breathing. Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitors, they are in really, really good shape, but they've got 6 minutes, and they can go as hard as they can for 6 minutes. And people can do that as athletes. But what happens when strikes are being thrown? What happens when you're in the middle of taking that deep and they throw a punch, and now your gas tank is already on empty, or they catch you because you were in the middle of that big huff, right? So all of these little things apply when we're talking about bringing a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner into more of a Vale Tudo self-defense type curriculum or scene.
All right, so I think we did a really good full U-turn here from Rickson to sport, and then right back to Rickson as far as your approach, right? So yeah, I mean, I guess for anybody watching this, what do you think their takeaway points should be about Rickson Gracie and modern BJJ?
Rickson Gracie is a grandmaster. How long does it take somebody to become a grandmaster? I will never, ever be one, right? I started jiu-jitsu when I was like 13, 14. Maybe if I live till like I'm 80, maybe, right? But Rickson comes from a time that's very different. And Rickson is I'm going to say he is the root and the trunk to the tree of jiu-jitsu, right? That's what he is. And he feels very strongly about upholding what his dad, his uncles, his cousins, they all represented. Was jiu-jitsu was created for self-defense against a bigger, larger, stronger opponent. And fighting was the byproduct of it all. But time and time again, Grandmaster Elio talks about my jiu-jitsu is for self-defense. And Rickson says himself quite often, I've heard him say this out of his mouth, he was that hardcore competitor. He was the representative. But he understands that not everybody that comes to jiu-jitsu is going to be able to be like him. People come from all different walks of life. It takes a very small percentage. It's a very small percentage of a person that is willing to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because it's a tough guy sport, right? Where Rickson wants to be of service to everybody. And he's no longer fighting. So his goal is to show the world his jiu-jitsu to serve his community. And I think a lot of the Brazilian jiu-jitsu culture they do it in general with the Gracies. They're outdated. They put them off because they're Gracies. And people have this weird thing about them. But at the end of the day, Rickson Gracie was a part of the family that brought jiu-jitsu to the world, right? So Rickson has his opinions. And I think we as a culture in today, especially in jiu-jitsu, have gotten so far removed from what the samurai originally had, which was honor and respect, right? That's not a part of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu culture today. Now it's a Craig Jones rip off your pants and be in a Speedo and make a scene. That's very far removed from what Jiu-Jitsu was supposed to be. And so people need to take away that, listen to Rickson. He's not going to be around forever. These masters that were a part of Jiu-Jitsu's roots are not going to be around forever. And if you don't know your past, you're never going to know your future. And they have something to teach you, right? Have a white belt mindset. But unfortunately, in this modern era, everybody thinks the old ways are rubbish, and they're not.
All right. Oh, I never want to be a grandmaster. Put a star right there. Never want to be a grandmaster. I'll quote. Here's a good quote. There's chiefs in a tribe. You have chieftains and you have braves. Someone's got to shoot the arrows, and that's Grandmaster Runesteller. He was a grandmaster, so he said that. But yeah, he said the same thing. I want to be the one. I'd rather be the one shooting the arrows. I'll let someone else.
Sure.
Take
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
mantle of that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, again, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your thoughts on this topic. For anybody watching, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think Rickson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is better than modern Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Do you think modern Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is better? Which one do you think is better and why? Shoot off in the comments. Don't forget to like and share one of these episodes once a week. And also, if you want to tune in for an extra episode on a different channel, you can go to the Pit Online Dojo, where I do a episode with UFC coach John Hackelman. Every Wednesday, we cover a different topic, and you can ask him questions, and I'll bring them up so you can ask a UFC coach live questions there. Catch y'all next time.